turn the recording on. Got 2 recordings going. All right, we are set up.
Good.
And shut that window. And all right, so we're talking about church inside out. Really one of my favorite topics. And my thinking on this, or my phrasing of this, has had to change a little because the pandemic really got the church out of the building in a lot of ways. But as I was commenting last week, in some ways, we didn't really get outside of ourselves that much. And no one did. I'm not blaming anyone. But I don't know that we can say that we are more in contact with our communities than we were before, which is really my idea of talking about getting us out. It's not just getting out, it's getting out into the community and getting out in touch with people. You know, you could send the church out on a hike and that wouldn't help your outreach particularly. It's about how are we going to contact the world and the world outside. So I want to start off tonight talking about bowling. It was interesting. Last year we did some videos of this where we're trying to work up a video series. And so we actually went to a bowling alley, and most of you have heard from Joey Roberts. So he's filming me. So first he says, you throw a ball, and I had to throw it over a camera and left 3 pins. He said, well, go ahead and knock them down. And so I threw it, and sure enough, I got the spare. And I was pretty impressed. I hadn't bowled like 20 years. And then he got behind me, he said, well, throw another ball. And so I threw another ball, and I threw a strike. So I hope that video comes out, because I was pretty impressed with myself. But that's not what we're talking about. Want you to think about bowling maybe back when we were young. I don't know what contact you might have had. I was in a city where one of the bowling alleys had a brilliant marketing strategy. I still think it's brilliant. They offered free lessons to kids. And I think that's great, because you get, first off, lifelong clients. Plus, most kids aren't going to go by themselves. They're going to need their parents to take them. So you're bringing in the whole family, right? And so a lot of times on Sunday afternoon between morning church and evening church, I would go with one of my buddies and we'd go bowling. I think it was 25 cents a line back then, so it wasn't bad. But once we went on a weeknight, and when we went in, there were only 2 lanes available to us. All the other lanes were taken up by people wearing shirts that looked alike. Any idea what was going on? Bowling leagues, right? Bowling leagues used to be really big. Most companies had several teams, probably a bigger company, and a smaller office would still have the bowling team, and at least once a night they would go bowling. And bowling alleys lived off of leagues, and that was what drove them. And while they were glad to have us kids, they were really hoping that we would grow up and join a league, right? But a man named Robert Putnam, a sociologist, wrote a book called Bowling Alone, where he noted that more people are bowling today than ever, and leagues are almost dead. And he said that's not just about bowling. He noted that people aren't connecting with one another. He noted a 58% drop in attendance of club meetings. And this is the year 2000. So in the last 20 years, I doubt that the number has trended up. I bet it's continued to go down, right? Family dinners were down 43%. Now, I remember I dated a girl in high school. Her family didn't have a dining table because they never ate together. And I thought that was amazing. Today, it's not that amazing. You know, a lot of times my wife and I, you know, we grab a plate and go sit in front of the TV and watch something while we eat. You know, our kids are grown, they're not around, but even families with children Nowadays, a lot of times they're not eating together. 43% drop. The frequency with which people invite their friends over had declined 35%. A woman from church sent me a text on Sunday morning, actually, inviting us for lunch this past Sunday. And I couldn't remember the last time I had been invited to someone's house, right? We'd gone to restaurants with people, but even not just because of the pandemic, but people don't invite others to their home that often. They're more inclined to go out to eat together. We're growingly less in touch with one another, growingly less, we're not the joiners we used to be, let's put it that way. And I think churches have seen that. Now, the interesting thing with bowling alleys, the ones that have survived and thrived are the ones that changed. They now cater to birthday parties. They have laser tag and video games and everything else along with the bowling. And most of the traditional bowling centers that refuse to adapt are, if not closed, they're on their way. Now, we could probably also draw some other conclusions toward churches with that same thinking. I won't say we have to have laser tag to church, but I will say that we need to be aware of a changing society and be aware of what things we can change and what we can't, right? That you have the message that we're presenting that we're never going to change, hopefully. And then you've got the packaging of that message. But I'm getting off topic. I want to talk about who is my neighbor? Who are these people around us? Now, for me, it's Abilene, right? That's not going to be for you. But when I'm thinking about community around the church, I have to think about this town of 120,000 here in north central Texas. People call it West Texas, and I think El Paso's 8 hours west of us. I don't see how we're West Texas, but here in Abilene, and specifically, I am in the area that we call the Hill. If you're not from Abilene, you probably couldn't spot a hill in Abilene, but we call it the Hill. The highest point of Abilene is actually where our church building is. And the Abilene Christian University is across the street from our church building, but we've got the highest point in town, which should be something special, right? But I'm going to need to look around and see, and then even more specifically, I need to think about who's around me. It is amazing and embarrassing, as I've talked about this for several years now, I still have some neighbors I do not know their names. And it's much easier to write about it than do it, I guess. Some of that has to do with changes in the neighborhood. I mean, the ones on either side that have been here forever, yeah, I know their names, but the ones across the street that just moved in last year, I don't know their names yet, but it's an interesting exercise. And I'd really encourage you at some point, if you don't apply any of these others, try this with your congregation. Say, just draw a map of your block, or maybe it's your apartment building, depending on living situations, and then do your best to put in names. How well can you name the people around you? And then, and this is really just for yourself, but how much do you actually know about them? My neighbors to the east, I know their names. I know that they're obviously retired, and that's about all I know about them. Neighbors to the west, I know pretty well. I know a lot more. We interact a lot more. We share a chain link fence, and so we see each other a lot more. But I think part of what we have to do as individuals is get to know the community around us. And then think about your church. How many times have we seen congregations that did not know their neighbors, did not know the people around them? I remember hearing a preacher who was retiring at this congregation, a big congregation, after like 30 years. And someone asked him if he had any regrets. And he said, I regret that we haven't had more impact on the neighborhood around our church. And that's something we're trying to do. It's a challenge because we have a lot of lower income people around our church. And it takes an effort to bridge a gap between a highly educated congregation, which we have, a number of college professors and a lot of people with degrees, to reach out to people who are working day labor and barely getting by and living in situations we're not used to. I got to go on a ride along with a policeman 3 years ago, I guess it was, and was pretty surprised when he showed me the crack house 5 minutes from my home. And this is the place where they manufacture drugs and sell drugs in this area. And it's like, wow, had no idea, So an exercise to get to know the people around you, and then broadening it out as we think about our community. There's a professor named John Footer, works at Moody Theological Seminary in Chicago. Wes is in Chicago. He wrote, he's done a lot on urban studies. He's one of the experts on urban evangelism. And he wrote a book called Neighborhood Mapping, which I found very interesting as far as community analysis. I'm going to lay out his 4 steps. I see the first 3 as especially applicable to churches, okay? The 4th one, I haven't seen a church make good use of this. You may be able to, so I'll go ahead and present it. He starts off with prayer walks, and don't let the strange term scare you. I was going to speak at a church, and they wanted me to do this seminar for 3 hours Friday night, 10 hours on Saturday, and 2 hours on Sunday. I thought, my goodness, what are we going to do all that time? I can't just talk and have them listen. I thought, we'll do prayer walks. We will get their congregation out into their community, and we will do a prayer walk. And they okayed the itinerary. And then a couple of weeks before I was going, they said, you need us to be doing anything? And I said, well, the one thing would be to map out where you want to go on the prayer walks. And a couple of days later, they called back and they said, our elders weren't comfortable with this thing about the prayer walks. We're canceling it. We're not sure if it's biblical. And I thought, is your problem with praying or with walking? Actually, I didn't say that because I value the ministry I was trying to do there. But basically, that's all it is. You walk through your neighborhood and you pray for that neighborhood as you walk. And you send your church out, and it's not a door knocking campaign. It's just going out and praying and believing that God will honor that prayer. And it is surprising if you haven't walked your neighborhood. I live in Abilene. People don't walk. Again, when I did the ride along with the policeman, he said, when I see someone walking, I assume they're up to no good. My goodness. But that's where we live. Everybody's got a car, and you drive your car. But if you haven't walked your neighborhood, it can be interesting. And maybe it's not always going to be the streets right around your church. Maybe you're wanting to plant a little further over. Maybe you're in a commercial area and there aren't many houses, but you choose an area where you're wanting to have an outreach. and you send your members to walk through that area and pray for it. And there's nothing more, there's no more ritual to it, okay? You're really not necessarily talking with people. Now, we've got a couple of our staff members that have now gone out, and as they walk, they stop and ask people if they can pray for them. You know, it is surprising. People don't often get that offended when you say, is there something I could pray for you? You know, I was with a group at the old soul winning workshop in Tulsa years ago, if you ever heard about that. And we went to this Mexican restaurant, and when we were finishing up, you know, we've been joking with the waitress and being silly like groups are. And as we were leaving, she said, is there anything else I can do for you? And one of the guys said, we'd like to do something for you. And her eyes got big. She said, for me? He said, yeah, we'd like to pray for you. And within a few minutes, she was telling us her life story, single mom, her rent was coming due. She did not have money for rent. She was working all the hours she could, but, you know, didn't know how she was going to make it. And yeah, we left as big a tip as we could, you know, to help her with that moment. But an amazing connection opened up because somebody said, can we pray for you? So there is also power in going out and talking with people while you're praying. But initially, I would suggest that you tell your people, focus on just the prayer. This first time out, let's just stake out our territory. Let's just walk through it. Let's let Satan know that God is here and that he sent his people and that we are praying people and that we will be praying for this neighborhood. Secondly, look for potential partners. Could be nonprofits in the area, possibly some of the businesses in the area would be willing to help you learn about where you are. And this is sort of a mission outlook, okay? But I think a lot of our churches need a little more mission thinking about the area where we're going. Schools, if you come in with not the attitude, what can you do for us, but what can we do for you? I think that can really help. Keaton says a prayer walk can be eye-opening as to how many people live around the building. Yeah, we can miss that when we just drive up and then drive home, especially if you have any multi-family housing, you know, be it apartment buildings or whatever. You just may not realize how many people are there and how many people are close by. You also may see just initially some needs that are around that you hadn't realized. So you're looking for potential partners, people that can help you understand, school administrators, business people, nonprofit leaders. We may have been in an area for years, but I would suggest that non-Christians see our community in a different way and see things we don't see, right? Which I think this third part can be really, really powerful. I know that it's a Saddleback guy, Bill Hybels, is that his name? Bill, is that right, Bill Hybels? Doesn't sound right. Anyway,
No,
he's Willow Creek, I think.
Okay, that may be
Sorry,
what I'm
Wes,
thinking
didn't
about.
interrupt you.
Anyway, one of them, when he sends out a church planning team, their strategy in a new community is to do surveys. Okay. People understand surveys. You know, that happens, that's done, that they're not shocked that someone's doing a survey. They may be surprised that someone's talking to them, but the fact that you're doing a survey isn't necessarily surprising. Something that Saddleback's Rick Warren. Yeah, I think it was Rick Warren. You're right, Philip. That's who it was. Rick Warren's the one that does that. Todd Johnson from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary did a survey and found that only about 80% of non-Christians said they personally knew a Christian. So it's interesting that, you know, even as we're inviting friends and neighbors, they may not have any idea who we are. So we can go out with a survey and ask some questions and get to know them. You'll probably want to talk with city authorities and find out if you need a permit, or, you know, make sure you don't want church members getting picked up for solicitation, right? So you figure out what's going on there, but you avoid personal questions, right? You're not going to be writing down their name and where they live. You're just going to try and ask them some things about themselves. In the workbook, I have a sample survey. So if you have the workbook, you can see that there. I think one of the most powerful questions is down at the bottom. It says, why do you think people don't go to church? Because what you're going to hear from them is why they don't go to church. But if you ask them why they don't get to church, they may get defensive. But if you ask them to generalize, why do you think people don't go to church? Well, you know, they kind of see Christians as hypocritical, or they, you know, you'll start hearing from them how they see church. Also ask them if a church wanted to minister to this area, wanted to serve this area, wanted to do something for the people in your community. Let me get away from church speak, right? Wanted to do something for the people in this community, what would you suggest? Great way to find out what people are looking for. And you may find a simple ministry that's available to your church. So I think community surveys can be powerful. Now, this fourth one seems a little more academic. I included, he talks about compiling stories or case studies, kind of saying, well, the typical family in our neighborhood is blue collar, single parent, you know, whatever. That may be helpful to your church. It may not. The surveys really strike me, the prayer walks, and even the looking for the partners. I have a little more trouble with that one. But again, I'll lay out footers information. So that's sort of a technical way of going about it. I mentioned the survey in the workbook. Also, just let me mention, we're not going to get into this tonight, but in the book and the workbook, there's some materials on cross-cultural ministry, even some suggestions on starting a Hispanic ministry. And I think that we need to get away from this idea of, well, we're going to hire the guy in Honduras we've been working with for years. We're going to bring him here to the States and set him loose. He may do well in the States, he may not, right? And you may not have anybody from Honduras living in your city, and he's as foreign to them as, you know, as you are, right? So I think there are better ways. I think there's ways to get to know people, more personal ways. And so some of that's in the book. I just wanted to mention that. We're not really going to get into that. I'd be happy to talk some more if you're interested in that, and maybe point you to some people who can help with that. All right. Let me stop for a minute. Questions or comments?
Tim?
Yes. Jim. Yeah.
One of the enriching things that we found over the past several years was to adopt an elementary school nearby and work through the social worker that's assigned to that school, or through some responsible person, to take food to families on the weekends that don't have food, and maybe buy them the appropriate clothing for those families during the various seasons, and then do something for them at Christmas. And it's non-confrontational, it's private, it's very enriching for everyone. The other thing was that our young people are very interested in outward ministry. And so you have to run real fast to keep up with them.
That's right.
And so they wanted to feed the homeless. So we barbecued for several years on one Saturday and Sunday night a month. And probably 100 to 200 homeless people came up that hill. We're on a hill to eat with us, to get a haircut, maybe watch a football game, maybe have 2 hours of normalcy in their life.
Yeah.
That led us to go into the inner city with the Methodist Church to give them showers twice a week. And all we did was referee the fights if they happened. That's all we did. But that led to a prayer time on Wednesday night, an accountability circle where we get to know all these people.
Very
and
good.
It's not my idea.
And you make an important point, and let me emphasize it because I may forget it later. Younger generations are very interested in hands-on ministry. They want to be a part of it. They want to do something, and they are not interested in a church that's all talk and no action. And so if they don't see us doing something, they really aren't that interested in what we have to say. We ran into that early in Argentina. To the point where one young man finally said, look, don't call me for another prayer session, but if you want to go do something with the poor, I'm there. It was kind of a wake-up call for us.
It's living out the message.
Yeah.
It's living the message.
Yes, exactly. Well, let me move into this next section. Thinking about Jesus, this is one of the most interesting accusations made against him, right? In Luke chapter 7, when they said, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And to think that religious leaders would see that as a bad thing, okay? Jesus was doing what holy men didn't typically do. He was spending time with common people. He was spending time with the non-religious, right? And some of the ones that didn't even have a door back into religion. And Jesus was offering them a way back in, right? And I think that he modeled something for us. I think that he wants his church to be a friend of sinners, not a friend of sin, right? But a friend of sinners, okay? So how do we go about that? I call it prayerful participation, And I think there's some basic guidelines we need to keep in mind. First off, we want to identify the culture, but we don't want to become identical with our culture. And we've got to have that set out from the beginning because that can get blurred so quickly. We want to speak in ways that our culture can understand, right? When I caught myself falling into church speak before, when you talk about, how can we minister to you? That's not how people talk if they're not church people, right? And so some of it is learning to de-churchify our language and use words that people understand. That's a part of it. That's part of the identification. And so you're not changing the message again. And that's the big thing. You don't want to become identical with your culture. You don't want to get to the point where you just totally blend in, but you want to be able to speak in a way they can understand. All right. Keith was talking about, I guess, what we were talking before, emphasizing community events where he lives. And I think that's important, that the church be a part of the community, not just call the community to our things, but for us to participate in the community's events, right? And that's where this term comes from, prayerful participation. I wish, to be honest, I would love it. I wish we could just put up signs and say, come hear about God, and then sit back and wait. And it just doesn't work. We have got to be friends of the sinners. We've got to go out and live our lives among the pagans, as First Peter says. But we don't expect non-Christians to live like Christians. And that's where it can get hard. Because if you're going to be around non-Christians, you're going to hear things you don't want to hear. You're going to see things you don't want to see. You may be offered things you didn't want to drink, or certainly didn't want to smoke, right? And learn that you don't have to freak out about those things, that you can simply say no, right? Talking about going out and reaching out. Keaton says, I like Randy Harris's analysis of salt and light and living Jesus. Salt and light are by nature very different from their surroundings, but they have to be part of the surroundings to have their desired impact. Exactly. We were thinking about, I guess it was Keaton in his prayer talking about not being afraid of changing culture. And I think that's part of it, because you have to remember that if culture becomes more different from the church, then our light's going to stand out even more, right? I don't think we have to be afraid of that. The early church started in a very hostile environment once it got outside of Judea, right? And thrived. And I think we can too. Like I say, we can't expect non-Christians to live like Christians. We can't ask them to be just like us. Imagine that someone invites you to dinner and they send you a list of things. They tell you how you have to dress, what you can talk about, what you can't talk about, that you have to eat what they like, you have to drink what they like. And I'd say, you know what? It's not worth the trouble. Thanks for the invitation, but we're not going, right? I don't think any of us would like that. And sometimes, if we're not careful, that's what we communicate to outsiders. You can come, but you better dress right. You better talk right. You better not do things that bother us, right? Now, am I saying, okay, you're never going to say anything to these people about how they're dressed? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that early on, establishing a relationship is more important than whether or not they've got a bad word on their t-shirt, right? I remember being in Cuba, and this one young man had in Spanish a shocking phrase on his t-shirt. And I thought, I hope he's an outsider, That I thought, boy, at first it was like, wow, that really hits you, And then I thought, okay, it's a shirt, right? It's really not him. But we have to be careful that we recognize that until people are under the lordship of Jesus, we can't expect them to live like they're under the lordship of Jesus. Okay? And so outsiders are going to act like outsiders. And if we are going to reach out to them, if we're going to go out to them, then we're going to be in an uncomfortable zone. But you understand, they have the same discomfort coming into us, but they don't have the motivation we do. And so we've got to get over that, okay? And then we don't create extra burdens for those that are away from God, right? You don't start saying, boy, if you want to be baptized, you got to have those tattoos removed. No, I mean, a tattoo does not change their heart, all right? They are tattooed now. Okay. I don't want to abuse Paul's words, but I think of 1 Corinthians 7, let each person stay as they were when they were called, I mean, telling someone they've got to make this major change in something that they aren't doing sinfully now. Because I'm not talking about, okay, if you've got a homosexual couple wanting to come to church, I think that's a different question than someone who has a tattoo, right? But I have heard Christians tell someone, if you want to come to church, you've got to cover that up. I think we got more important things to deal with, right? So I want to now get into some specific suggestions. First off, get involved in your community. Keith was talking about the church getting involved in community events. And I think personally, it's good to join a club, right? To be honest, especially preachers, I know our time can be so short, but if we're not careful, we end up living in this Christian cocoon where we hardly have any contact with non-believers. And if you can find something that will regularly put you in the company of non-believers, I think even your preaching is going to be enriched by it, right? Be it a community chorus, be it a fishing club, be it a writers guild, whatever it is. I'm not saying you have to go bar hopping Friday night. That's not what I'm talking about. But you can find ways to be involved. You can volunteer, exactly. That there are lots of organizations that really need volunteers, and you can be doing good in your community and not always have to say, I'm from such and such Church of Christ, right? You can say, I'm Bob and I'm here and I'm helping, and I want to help. And we're here with United Way. Okay. You're with United Way right now. So get involved in your community. That can be a church project. Jim was talking about the elementary school. We had some retired people years ago who were able to set up an after-school reading program with one of the local elementary schools and offer free help in reading, and actually did it at the church building. We are trying to think, 4 blocks from this elementary school. So, it's fairly easy for the kids to come over afterwards, and they weren't using the Bible to read with them. They were just reading with these kids and loving on these kids, right? And so it's possible that it can be done from your church building, but it's likely you'll need to go somewhere else to do it. Secondly, be aware of people in your life. Now, this should be obvious, but it's surprising how often it's not. And I'm guilty of this. It's like I say, it's much easier to write these things than to live them. But how often do we go to Walmart and treat the cashier as if they were part of the cash register, right? We don't even see them. We aren't even aware of them. I had a chance to go speak for Herald of Truth at a small church. I won't say the state, a small church. And they were talking about, they had some interest in a Hispanic ministry. And they said, but problem is none of us know any Hispanics. Now, this is a small town, okay? And I had trouble finding the church building. And so I had stopped at the convenience store in town. And I said, do you guys regularly shop at this place? Oh, yeah, it's the only place to get gas in town. I said, when I went in, everyone working in that store was Hispanic this morning. And if you go there regularly, it's hard for you not to know some Hispanics, okay? You may not have interacted with them. You may not have seen them, but they're there, right? And how many other people are around us? The mail carrier that comes and just some people that we see in our neighborhood. Sounds like a Sesame Street song, but you know, there are people all around us. And one problem, the bigger the city gets, the less likely we are to see people. That's sort of a defensive strategy, because you can't, you know, if you remember the old Crocodile Dundee movie where he's walking down the street going, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. And, you know, you can't do that in a big city. You can't live that way. But we also can't stop seeing people. And so be aware of people that you're going to see more than once. How's that? You know, be especially aware of those people. And if there are people that you see on a weekly basis, you definitely need to be learning their names and trying to be friendly, trying to engage, right? Seems common sense. And this next one too, meet your neighbors, right? They say that the garage door opener has been one of the greatest barriers to community in a lot of our, especially the suburbs, right? And we don't have a garage anymore. But the house we lived in before, we had a garage door opener, and that was exactly what happened. I would drive in from work, I would hit that button, I would drive in, and before I got out of the car, the door was coming down, right? And I didn't have to see anybody if I didn't want to. And so we live in a time where it's very easy to not meet your neighbors. So I think a basic step for community involvement is meeting your neighbors. Ask questions and listen to the answers. People really want someone to listen to them. And you may need, you know, we have this urgency to share the gospel. And I share that, I understand that. But I also know that many times, if you haven't listened first, they don't want to hear you talk, right? And there's a real power in going, like I say, you ask questions, but you listen to their answers. Hey, did you get a new car? Or, oh no, what happened to your car, right? That big dent in the side wasn't there yesterday. Are you guys all right? Is anything you need? Hey, I noticed you're, you know, looks like your son's home from college. Is that, you know, just ask and listen. People like to talk about themselves. Most people do, you know, so you can ask about families, about jobs, about some project they got going on at their house. Hey, you're putting on a porch. Oh, that's great. We've thought about that. Are you doing the work yourself? You having somebody else do it? Where'd you get your ideas from? Get ideas online. You watch HGTV, you know, ask questions. All right. Number 5, remember that our neighbors need Jesus above all. And that doesn't mean that the only thing we're going to talk to them about is Jesus, okay? But as we're talking with them, we need to remember that we can help them fix their finances and help them fix their marriage and help them beat addiction. But if we don't give them Jesus, we've sold them short. We haven't given them what they really need, right? They don't know that. Some of them do, but most of them don't know that. So part of what we will be doing is helping them see what they really need. But that needs to be there. And I'll go ahead and say this is a challenge with younger generations. We live in a time where tolerance is the virtue of virtues, and they don't want to be seen as intolerant, don't want to be seen as judgmental, don't want to be seen as saying that what they have is better than what others have, right? And so we've got to somehow help young people understand this concept that Jesus didn't just come to bring us good ideas, didn't just come to give us the best self-help advice out there. He came to bring us salvation, right? You must deal with urgent needs to address spiritual needs. Exactly. That has to happen. And so I think that we keep the important in mind, even as we're dealing with the urgent. So you may not be, while you're helping them get their car started, saying, hey, Jesus can start your life the way we're starting this car. That's not always what you're going to be doing. But you are looking for chances to take the relationship to the next level. I guess that's how I want to put it. We live Christ to earn the right to speak about Christ. That's kind of what Keith was saying. You've got to show with your life what you believe for people to really want to have what you have. We talked last time about the example of Basil the Great and what I believe it was Tertullian wrote about him after he died. His words were like thunder because his life was like lightning. And I think that has to be how we see things, that we want to go out and thunder at the people around us, but they need to see the lightning first, or the thunder doesn't make sense. It's just a bunch of noise if you don't see the lightning. But as we go out, as we participate, we have to remember who we are, right? We are not like everyone else. We are ambassadors. We are different. And part of us chafes against that. All of our lives, there's been this pressure to not be different. What are all the other kids wearing? What are all the other kids doing? The clothes that I wear are like the clothes everybody else wears. And the way I arrange what's left of my hair is kind of the way, the rest of society deals with their hair. I remember going to a wedding a few years ago, and it's really windy outside. And I realized that only my hair and one other older man's hair were blowing around. Everybody else had something in their hair. And that's when I started using something in my hair, because I realized I was one of the few people that wasn't doing it, right? Believe it or not, I still actually have to slick this stuff down, or it ends up standing up the way it is, But we go out and we remember who we are. We want to touch the world, but we don't want to become the world. So we keep our eyes on the fruit of the Spirit. To me, Galatians 5 is such a helpful passage. I can look at these qualities and say, this is what I need to see in my life. And as I'm doing ministry, I need to see these things in my life. I need to see love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. That should be growing in me because of what I'm doing, right? I mean, as I'm doing this, these qualities should be showing up. And so I'm watching out for the works of the flesh. And if I'm seeing anger in me, if I'm seeing jealousy in me, if I'm seeing a tendency towards, sexual thoughts, if I'm seeing, a desire to participate in sin, then I need to stop and say, well, this isn't what I need to be doing. And sometimes you have to say, this particular ministry is not for me. I don't need to be doing this. And there are other people who can do it. It's not good for me. This particular way of reaching out to people, as I go with these guys to the football game and they're all drinking beer, and I find myself not only drinking, but drinking, right? And I have to say, no, this is taking hold of me. I'm not just participating with them, I'm being changed by them. And so you say, okay, either I don't do this anymore, or I always take a Christian friend with me. It's amazing how much easier it is for two to say no than for one to say no. You know? So I think, between those two things, watching the fruit of the Spirit and watching out for the works of the flesh, I think that's vital as we go out into the world. And the last one should be the first one and should be all the way through. I think that we can underestimate prayer. We have the privilege at Herald of Truth of working with, I call him a young man, he's in his 40s now, but a young man in Cuba named Tony Fernandez, who started with his parents in their living room, and now in their province there's over 1,000 believers that meet together. And for years he's carried a map of his province and been especially aware of cities that didn't have a church. And he was telling me about this one place that's down near the Bay of Pigs, down the south of Cuba. And he was telling me once, he said, I realized I was only about an hour from this town. I decided to go there. And so I drove. Then he said, after an extended time of fervent missionary prayer, I decided to talk to someone. And I confessed to my wife, I don't know if I've ever had a time of fervent missionary prayer. But Tony goes to this town where he knows no one, and he prays, gets out to talk with someone, and that first person is interested in a Bible study. And I was there the next week, and the guy texted Tony while we were out and said, when are you coming to study the Bible with me? So this is not Tony forcing the guy, okay? I saw in Argentina, when we were living there was a man, he and his wife lived in one of the shanty towns. They were the poorest of the poor. He was an alcoholic, illiterate, lumberjack, big guy. Little money he would earn, he would buy alcohol, get drunk, come home, he beat his wife, beat his kids. And his wife had become a Christian. And the church decided, we got to get them out of there. That this is a death sentence for them. And one night we were meeting to discuss plans to move Norma and the kids out. And I said, I feel like we've been treating Fernando like he's the enemy, instead of recognizing that he's a victim of our enemy. And we spent some time praying for Fernando that night. And the next day, when some people went out to their house, he came out crying and said, I want to change my life, and I need you people to help me do it. And I'm convinced that the prayer the night before had to do with it. I won't tell you that every time we pray for someone, they're going to become a Christian. But I am going to tell you that I believe in the power of prayer, and not just on the mission field, but also here in the States. I believe that God honors fervent prayer, honors the prayers of his people as we're looking to reach out to the world around us. And this gets back to what Keaton was talking about from Randy Harris. I stole this one from an old book called Out of the Salt Shaker. It came out in the 70s, I think. But I love this line: without contact, there is no impact. And you think about salt in a salt shaker, and it doesn't do anything for the food until you get it out in the right place, right? Not just on the table, not on the floor, but where the food is, it can do its job. And I think that Christians are the same way, that if we aren't out of the salt shaker, if we aren't in contact with those around us, if we aren't touching the lives of people who don't know Jesus, we're not impacting our communities. It's not going to happen. They're not going to crawl into the salt shaker with us, okay? Sometimes they do. I mean, sometimes you get people say, oh, I saw the church building, I was curious and I walked in. I've seen that happen, but it's not the most common. We know it's not the most common. So remember that phrase, without contact, there is no impact. And repeat this, the only way to get outsiders into the church is to get the insiders to go out. So I have talked and talked. Oh my, Jim has written a good bit. Let's see. Pandemia has motivated the church to take church to the streets. Relationships are established. Trust is developed. Sharing intimacy with folks to address their innermost struggles, worshiping with them in their environment fosters acceptance and the opportunity to model Christ. Amen. Then return for Sunday worship with our home church family. It becomes restorative, encouraging an arterial venous process where we return to the heart, expended for encouragement, renewal, and then recommissioned back out into the community. Now, if I happen to steal that, Jim, I probably won't give you credit, okay? But you can read this. Oh, I said that, and Tim thought of it. Thank you so much for the study. Thank you for teaching, challenging us the reality of post-pandemic community and faith will look, feel, taste differently. It will. And that is a whole different workshop we need to have, right? But we need to be thinking about the new normal is not going to be normal. It's not going to feel normal, all right, for some time. The message and gift of Jesus never changes. It's tragedy, the homeless, of the poor, the lost. There's so many come out of abusive family and family systems. What you're teaching, encouraging, reveals to them and shares with others a healthy faith and spiritual path, accepting, caring, spiritual faith, family. Key says, thanks so much. Thank you guys. I appreciate you taking the time for this, for valuing this, because I have to believe that if you didn't want to reach out to your communities, you wouldn't be participating. And so I thank you for that. You know, I have interest in people reading these books. If I had a way to just give them for free, I would. 21st century Christian seems to want to recoup some of the money they invested into it, and so they don't really want me just giving books away for free. But I can tell you, I'm definitely not getting rich selling books. You know, especially last year, I think royalties were $40 or something, you know, so I'm not living off the books. My interest is that people hear this information and read this information. I'm looking forward to us getting, I'll try and make sure that we let you guys know when we get the video series put together. We need to reshoot some parts of it, but I want that to be a tool you can use as well. Last questions, comments?
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, guys. We've got 2 more sessions, 2 more Monday evenings. I hope you can be with us. Feel free to invite somebody else. You know, this isn't the sort of stuff that if you haven't heard the first part, you won't understand. Now you can pick up in the middle. We'll be good. So thanks a lot. Have a great week. I will see you 1 week from tonight.
All right. Bye, everyone.